Seems like old times, having you to walk with, just like old times, having you to talk with, and it's still a thrill just to have my arms around you, still the thrill that it was the day I found you.
Okay, it's with my great pleasure to introduce and welcome back home a celebrity in his career. He's a long-standing broadcast journalist and reporter for Chronicle, best known out in the field in every unique corner of New England, telling offbeat memorable stories. Throughout his days, he's done so many things. He's hosted the premiere season of the Discovery Channel popular mechanic show, close-up stories of America's most iconic landmarks like lighthouses, which we love dearly. He's an author of 3 books, New England Notebook, Wicked Pissed. His latest New England is New England General Stores, which will be on sale tonight. He's even been on the Travel Channel's Adventure Series, Freeze Frame, exploring Hawaii's volcanoes, covers caves in Puerto Rico and the South Pacific Islands of Tahiti. And now, oh boy, here we are. You never know where Ted Reinstein's going to be. He's right here in the barn at the Dean Winthrop House.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You know, it's a cliche, you know, when someone starts to talk and they say, you know, it's great to be here. It's more than great to be here. I was on assignment today in Foxborough, and I knew I was going to get done about 3:30, 4 o'clock, and I thought, now mind you, from there it's about 20 minutes to my house. But I was coming out to Winthrop. Oh, thank you. That's better for the picture. That's too loud. I hate to be like a disembodied voice in the dark. Yeah. Why don't we bring up a little more? Yeah. It was good. We just had some these ones out. That way, because this is as much a conversation. Is that good? Yeah. Is that all right? Yeah. Good. Long story short, I didn't know how long it would take me to get out here. And so I left myself plenty of time. And I sailed right through the Teddy. And so I got out here in plenty of time. And I did something that I haven't had an opportunity to do since it was built, believe it or not. And that was to wander all around Deer Island. Not the wastewater treatment part. And you know, we were joking up here before, talking, you know, Jeff and Sarah and Mike, you know, and I about how, you know, when I was growing up in the Highlands, that was the prison, right? It was off limits. And as I was walking around there today, what a resource. What an amenity. I mean, granted, there's a huge wastewater treatment plant there. It would be even better without that, but okay. Mitigation is mitigation. You take what you get. But, you know, I was standing up there in the top and I'm looking out and nothing but some grass and open ocean. And, you know, you could be on Mohegan Island. As long as you didn't look over toward the Linway. That kind of breaks it right there. But the point is, that I was thinking, you know, that was always there, right? Yeah. That view was already there, was always there when I was a kid. But, you know, it was a view just enjoyed by Cell Block C. Because if you lived in Winthrop, it was inaccessible. Right? I used to ride my bike. I was saying to Jeff, you know, I used to ride my bike on the causeway with friends, and we would ride as far as we could and loiter as long as we could by the gate until a guard came out and told us to get the you-know-what out of there. My point is, that what makes this truly great is that I am back in my hometown that I love. I lived here I born and grew up here, went to Winthrop High School, was a Viking, and played baseball. I always love to tell people that I played baseball. I played through high school, but I played in Little League, but I played in Pony League, which played at a field up by the point, right? And the planes were so noisy then. They've gotten a lot quieter, you have to admit. Because when I was growing up, they were deafening. And I always like to tell people that we played baseball, and part of it was like knowing sign language without actually using sign language, because you couldn't talk. The coach he's not going to yell to somebody in left field with a plane landing every 21 seconds, and it was deafening. So it was partly like weird sign language, all the time. But to come back to my hometown and be greeted by a full room like this, not only with people who live in my hometown, but this is even more special, the fact that it's a room full of people who, like me, share a love of history. So let's get to it. Thank you for coming. Thank you very, very much for being here. And thank you, Sandra. We've become like pen pals, right? Because we've probably traded, 20 or 30 emails over the last year until we get to the point that this is happening tonight. So thank you very much for coming out and joining me tonight. So tonight, I'm going to talk to you about my most recent book, my third book, all about it's actually one of two iconic New England institutions. Everybody at Chronicle knows, with all of my travels around New England for the past 25 years to every corner of New England, there are two iconic New England institutions, both born in New England, that I cannot pass by, especially in the more, gradually becoming more rare instance that it's one that I haven't visited before, which is especially true of the first one, which is the diner. Not talking about diners tonight, so you're welcome to tempt me, but I'm not talking about diners. Anybody remember the Neptune Diner? I thought of that as I went by. Right? Okay. I said I wasn't going to talk about that. So, there you go. The Miss Worcester is companions with the Boulevard. But the point is, diners have something in common with general stores. I like to start with it because diners, born in New England, some say Woonsocket, some say Worcester, I say Worcester, but the point is that diners began to disappear about half a century ago. They began to disappear about 50 years ago. They made a comeback, but that's the second part of our story. The point is, they began to disappear. And why they began to disappear is not a mystery. There was nothing mysterious about why they began to disappear. They began to disappear because of the advent of these new national fast food chains. And all of a sudden, you're driving along the highway, and instead of a mere choice of a Howard Johnson's, you can stop at the Golden Arches and get a hamburger for 20 cents. Right? And so this was new. It was new. It was exciting. It was different. It was cheap. Right? You know who took the hit for that? The mom and pops, exactly. The mom and pops on Main Street took the hit. Brothers took the hit. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Small independents took the hit. Okay? And they continued to take the hits. They continued to take the hits for the next 35 years. Then diners began to make a comeback. I always say that I noticed in my travels within the last 15 to 18 years, they began to make a comeback. Not the kind of comeback where you saw more and new ones sprouting up. That doesn't actually happen. But what did happen was those that went up for sale were more and more often being successfully transferred and reopened as the diner. That slide had been arrested. And very often, if we love history, we love preservation, very often progress counts sometimes just for when the slide is arrested, right? And you have stability with historic properties, which I consider most diners. That's what happened. And why they began to make a comeback, there's also no mystery to it. There's also no mystery to it. And it involves a word you're going to hear me say probably a dozen or more times tonight. But why diners made a comeback had nothing to do with what was served at the diner. There was no price on it. In fact, it was free. It was community. You realize over time that the gimmick of a 20-cent hamburger wears off. You also realize over time that it's very unlikely you're going to stop in at a Burger King on the highway and run into somebody you know. And that counts for something too. And you can't put a price on that. That's community. That's what you run into at a local diner, or any kind of local independent. The same is true of the general store. The general store also began to disappear about half a century ago, about 55 years ago. Also began to disappear because of the advent of national chains. Didn't involve food. General stores also have made a comeback. Those towns all around New England that are lucky enough to count an authentic general store today consider them often the centerpiece of their community. Why? Again, has nothing to do with a single item. I would say there isn't a single item on a single shelf in a single general store in a single town anywhere, and there are general stores in all 50 states, anywhere, that you can't buy somewhere else. Often cheaper. So again, the general store comeback has nothing to do with what is sold at a general store. It's free. It's free. It's community. It's the fact that general stores represent the community gathering place. And I'm going to talk about what these places represent. We're in one right now. We're in one right now. So why, you're wondering, are we looking at a dodo bird? I have no idea. I just put the talk together, right? So this is an example of an endangered species that became completely extinct. This is an example of a presently endangered species that is not yet extinct. I'm told, I've read that there's about a dozen white rhinos left on Earth today. This is also an example of a presently endangered species not yet fully extinct. Now this is an artist's rendering of what it might have looked like, what the predator might have looked like who hunted the dodo to extinction. When it comes to the type of predator that has brought the general store to near extinction, I'm going to tell you right now, none of our hands are clean. You may have consorted with one of these predators recently. What's today, Tuesday? I have consorted with one of these predators in the last 72 hours. Right, right. But here's the thing. Big box stores did not begin the slide of the general store. They were not the predator that began the slide of the general store. In fact, there's a reason why I chose these two very modern iterations of these two big box stores. When general stores began their slide to what looked like certain oblivion, Sam Walton was still running things out of a single store in Missouri. How far back is that? Yeah. Like I said, 50 years ago. Half a century ago. I always like to point to one of my favorite chroniclers of American popular culture, John Steinbeck. You know, John Steinbeck, curiously, was like the canary in the coal mine when it comes to the slide of the general store, when they began to be threatened and began to disappear, because he was uniquely positioned to notice when these stores began to disappear. Not one, not two, but dozens. Why? Because you know, you may recall, if you remember your high school English, in 1960, 61, 62, he set off from Sag Harbor, New York with his best friend Charlie and his custom-built GMC pickup with the camper in the back. And they set off and they circumnavigated America. And Steinbeck loved small-town America. He drove through some cities and he wrote eloquently about things he found in some cities, including New Orleans, where he wrote the last chapter of Travels with Charlie about civil rights. But mostly, Steinbeck loved to drive through small towns. So he was driving through all these small towns that had these general stores right around the time they were beginning to disappear. And so look what he noticed. The towns, the big ones, the big towns seem to be getting bigger and the small towns smaller. Those little unique stores that seem to give America some of its distinctive character, including general stores, seem to be rapidly disappearing. 1962. Now, when Steinbeck was growing up in Salinas, California here, this was an image that would be instantly recognizable to every single person in America. You'd say, that's a general store. I don't know where it is, general store. If you show this picture to folks under 30 today, yeah, look, I'm not saying they're not morons. They're going to say, you know, obviously some sort of store, some sort of commercial. They won't say it's a general store. They won't say it's a general store. So that changed. This was instantly recognizable. If you weren't in a place like this to do your business, at least get your necessities, at least once or twice a week. But this began to disappear. And if you go 50 years out from when that picture was taken in 1900, you have an event that did indeed grease the skids for the general store to begin to completely, it looked like completely disappear, because 50 years out, you have a completely life-changing event in America. In 1957, a majority of Americans, for the very first time, owned an automobile, and it changed everything. You know, I always say that we think about the car as changing basically mobility, right? People have more mobility. We don't appreciate anymore, right, that it changed every facet of life when people had cars, right? It changed the way we have relationships, right? It changed the way people bonded together. It changed the way we went about work. People thought nothing once they had a car of uprooting and switching jobs and traveling clear across the country. That didn't happen when you had no means of getting there, right? And it changed the way we went about cars. So if you go 20 years out from this picture, now you have the mushrooming of the interstate highway system by the late 1960s, and now for the first time, if you live in a small town and this is the choice at your little local store, which you would normally run in and get a crate of eggs or a stick of butter or what have you, and now you can go outside the house and there's a car parked in your driveway and you go and exit or two on the interstate and you have this choice. A little bit tough to compete if you're offering this choice, right? But a funny thing happened on the way to extinction. And I always like to say that this is kind of like the central irony that made me want to write this book. In collaboration, by the way, with my wife, Anne Marie, who was a former journalist with ABC, and really had the idea of, she said to me one day, I was casting around for a new book project about 4 years ago, and she said, you know, I know how much you love diners. She said, but we don't need another book on diners. But she said, you know, I know you love general stores. She said, there's like nothing written about general stores. And I couldn't believe it was true. But the irony that made me want to write it is that, and this is the funny thing that happened on the way to extinction, is that the same forces that we've just been talking about that looked like they would completely obliterate and extinguish the general store, in the end, which we'll work up to, become the same forces that saved them. So how so? Well, let me explain. So, again, solely because of the automobile. By the time you get to the late 60s, the early 70s, you have the mushrooming of suburbia in a way that never existed in America before. I mean, the suburbs have existed as a thing in America since the 1830s, 1840s, but never, ever like this. Now it was like the suburbs on steroids. So in every metropolitan area, again, solely because of the automobile, you have these suburbs that are mushrooming now, and these are the children of the greatest generation. These are the boomers who are now beginning families of their own. And you know, you have, this is California, but this is played out coast to coast, right out here to the Boston area. And you have these big suburban communities, sometimes with great school systems, sometimes not, but often with. And you've got, you know, these great athletic programs and recreational amenities, town pools, things that were unimaginable to the generation before. Their children now, the greatest generation, living in homes with square footages double, triple, quadruple the square footages of the homes that they grew up in. And in the morning, you drive off to work and you pass by, you know, X number of different little strip malls with 147 different places to get your coffee. Breakfast, muffin, bun, burrito, whatever the hell you want, and it looks like some sort of new suburban utopia. Or is it? Well, it turns out, another big box store size irony, a lot of people who are now living in these major sprawling, mushrooming suburban communities are missing something. They're missing something. And irony of ironies, what do you think it is? Bingo. Community. So it turns out that community really is defined by something other than just how many people share the same spot on God's green earth, right? You can live close enough to your next door neighbor to smell what your neighbor's having for dinner. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you feel like you are part of a close-knit community. And this was starting to change. This was starting to change. You know, it's so funny. One of the great things about being here in Winthrop tonight is anecdotes that I often say to people in Sanford, Maine, or on the Vineyard, or in the Berkshires, whatever. You know exactly what I'm talking about. right? Because I always say to people, I say, you know, when I grew up in the highlands of Winthrop, you know, if I was making trouble with friends down by the beach, you know, up at the Crest Ave or what have you, there was always somebody around. There was Mrs. Frank or Mrs. Pagliarulo or Mrs. Consiglio, you know, and she would say, you know, I see you boys. I know your mother, Teddy Reinstein, right? Yeah, but, you know, that, believe me, that pissed me off at the time. But now you look at that. And that means that that's a community of people that are looking out for each other. They know each other. They care about each other's business. I'm not saying you want to get up in each other's business all the time, but you know what I'm saying? That's community. This was changing in the 60s and 70s. That sense of close-knit community. You know, let me give you a perfect illustration of what I'm talking about. Not that you don't get it. But you know, in 1973, Life magazine published a poll that a lot of Americans found very disturbing. And it found that a majority of Americans, 63%, said they had only infrequent contact with their next door neighbor. That's what was happening, right? Life was speeding up. You had many more two-parent families where both parents were working. Nothing wrong with that, not making a value judgment, but things have an effect. Unintended consequences, what have you. Everything, and even progress, has sometimes negative effects in its own way. This was changing. The sense of community was changing. So, one remarkable American, who I think actually deserves a lot more attention than he gets, and a lot of people, I'm not making myself out to be some sort of that, because I had never heard of his name before I started researching the book. But he coined this term, the third place. And he was fascinated with how community was changing. And, you know, really in a slightly more somber way, he was actually thinking that community in America was changing so dramatically and so quickly that perhaps the way that we had understood it, that we were just talking about growing up, maybe that would be gone. Maybe it would just morph into something else where people didn't really know each other, never mind look out for each other anymore. And so part of his reason for wanting to write a book and research was to look at what community in America means. And I know, lest you think I'm getting into some long, drawn-out dissertation here, getting my head screwed on, is that it has everything to do with why general stores were able to make a comeback. Because Ray Oldenburg, wonderful American sociologist at the University of Florida, he spent a whole decade researching. No academic had ever done this before. As a field of research, American community. And he wanted to find out why it was changing. He wanted to find out what it means to Americans. Why community is important and what it means. So he spent a decade researching it. And in 1989, his book, The Great Good Place, came out. If you love community, read this book sometime. It's wonderful. And in this book, he coined a term that today we use to describe places, like I said tonight, public libraries, because what Ray Oldenburg found that had never, ever been theorized before was that we Americans, despite how free, we were talking about once cars were, you know, everybody had a car, we're free as a bird. We love to think as Americans. That's one of our hallmarks, right? And along with rugged individualism, is that we're free as a bird, right? We're free as a bird, we go where we want, we do what we want, damn it. Not so fast. Because Ray Oldenburg found in his research that nonetheless, we spend the vast majority of our lives as Americans in one of just 3 places. Now granted, we may all travel around a little bit, you may take a cruise, what have you. That's negligible in a lifespan. He's talking about how we spend the majority of our day-to-day lives. What he found was, we spend it all in one of 3 places. The first place you can probably guess, home, right? Family. The second place you can probably also guess, work. It's the third place in American life that nobody had ever put their finger on before. And the third place was a term that Ray Oldenburg coined. And the third place is not one particular place. It could be many different kinds of places. A third place could be a house of worship. A third place could be a barbershop, beauty shop, to get your hair done. A third place could be a public library. May the good Lord bless them and keep them. A third place could be a general store. It could be the corner bar, where they really do know your name. Not just on TV, for realsies. The point about third place, we're in a third place right now tonight.
Yeah.
This is a third place.
Yay.
How many of you know other people, right? How many of you expected to run into someone else you know here tonight? Exactly. Exactly. You probably would have been more surprised if there was someone you didn't know, right? Because that's the thing about third places, why they're so important. Because what Ray Oldenburg found, and no one had ever done this before, was what he found was, that's not just nice. When we run into the general store and run into someone we know and we stay and we tarry for a little while over a hot cup of coffee, when you go to return a book, when you go to the local hardware store, the independent hardware store, and you think, you know, maybe I'll leave an extra little bit of time because maybe I'll see Alma or Fred and we'll chat and we'll catch up. That's not just nice, it's vital. It's vital. No one had ever put it that way before. What he found in his research was these third places, they make us feel grounded in our community. They make us feel part of something bigger than ourselves. They make us feel, they make our choice of where we've chosen to live, they validate that choice. So they're vitally important, which is great. Not so great, they were disappearing. And it didn't mean we needed them any less. It just meant we had less of them. So what does that have to do with general stores? So all through those suburban communities where the boomers were now starting their own families, and a lot of them were missing that sense of community that they had had as kids, and a lot of them said to themselves, you know what? I want my kids to have more of a sense of community. I want there to be a Mrs. Pagliarulo who will tell my kid, hey, I know your mother, okay? So put it down. If I had a nickel for every time I heard something like that. But the point was, they talked with their feet. They moved to all sorts of small towns all around New England because they were determined to find more of a sense of community as they were beginning their own families. And they moved to towns like South Acworth, New Hampshire, and Putney, Vermont, and Whitefield, Maine. And they found these senses of communities in little towns all over America. For instance, Barnard, Vermont. A wonderful general store there in Barnard, Vermont was the same community gathering place, third place, in 1945 that it was on Friday night sing-alongs in 1985, that it was when they set up the ice cream counter in the back in 2005, that it was last fall when I dropped in again. It never stopped being this wonderful third place. So this is great. And by the way, a lot of these boomers that moved to these small towns, they walked the walk. They didn't just talk the talk. When a lot of these general stores went up for sale, they bought them to save them. And so a whole wave of general stores were saved that otherwise would not have been saved. Some of these folks had some money to do that. And sometimes a lot of folks in these towns weren't necessarily able to save these stores. So this is great. This is good. Now we come to the first bad news of the evening. Because this gets up to about the late 90s, 2000-ish in our story. And now, while these folks are getting up in age, these boomers that bought the stores, and they're thinking, you know what, maybe I'd like to take a little time off. Maybe I'll see if I can sell the store and see if somebody would like to buy it and keep the store going. This is great. Problem is, as they're getting up in age, the national economy is going the other direction. And the national economy goes in the toilet, basically. And now, nobody's buying general stores. Nobody is buying a general store. And by about 2000, 2001, especially in the wake of 9/11, when tourism in New England goes off in some places more than 90%, a whole wave of these general stores close for good. And now, it really does look like this might be it for the general stores. They were beginning to disappear, then the boomers came along, and don't blame them for everything, they saved a lot of goddamn general stores, okay? So let's not criticize the boomers. But it looked like luck had run out for the general store. And now it looked like maybe they really will go the way of the telegraph and the butter churn. You know, if they can't make it, they can't make it. Okay, we'll go to a museum and we'll see one. By the way, you want the most incredible irony of all when it comes to general stores? You know where you will find the General Store Museum? In Palm Beach, California. You know what it's filled with? Stuff from New England general stores. That's just not right. That's just not right. Anyway, it just occurred to me. So a whole wave of these general stores go out of business. And I think if it wasn't for the fact that sometimes it really does take a village. This is one of those hackneyed cliches that I almost hate to include because it's become just this kind of insufferable cliche, right? It takes a village. But sometimes it does. Sometimes it really does. And if it hadn't been for one small town in New England in particular, where it took a village, and the village actually acted, I like to say there would probably be, by my dumb reckoning, probably 50% fewer general stores in New England today. Because in South Ackworth, New Hampshire, there's been a general store, as in all the stores in this book, for at least 100 years. Most of them have been around for 200 years or more. But it had been around for over 100 years, and it always occupied the same spot in the middle of town there. But in the wake of 2001, the owners who'd owned it for 37 years couldn't sell the store. They needed to. They were in their 80s, but they couldn't find a buyer, and the store closed. And the little town of South Ackworth had to figure out how could they somehow save and reopen their single, only community gathering place. And you know, they tried everything. They pulled their money together, and they took out an ad in the New York Times Sunday magazine. Seemed like a good idea. Didn't have a buyer. Finally, they had a meeting one night, probably something much like this, right? And this woman raised her hand. She said, you know, I have a crazy idea. But she said, you know, we've already put our money together to see if we could find somebody else to buy the store. What if we put our money together and we bought the store? I know. It sounds very socialistic. Sometimes there's nothing wrong with that. You know, we come together and do something very socialistic when we put our money together and try to help a family in need, right? Somebody who, God forbid, has cancer, right? Can't afford the medical bills. Is that socialistic? I don't know. But that's what they did. They came together like little New Hampshire socialists. And they did something that had never been done in New England. A town came together to buy the general store themselves. And they operated like a co-op. You know, like a food co-op. You put in X amount of hours working at the store, you get X amount of discount on your groceries. Then they went to work inside the store. They came up with these pizza ovens out back to bring in more money, and these harvest dinners that today attract visiting chefs from all over New England. And today, because of what they did in South Ackworth, the village store is thriving like never before. I hope the lights don't go out there anytime soon. But in Shrewsbury, Vermont, just over the border, a different take on it taking a village to save the general store. I love this story because not only did they have to come together to save the store, they had to come together to withstand Mother Nature. Now, when this picture was taken, Marjorie Pierce right here is in her early 70s. And at that point, her family had already owned and operated Pierce's store for 75 years. But when you get to the mid-90s, if you're doing the math at home, she's in her mid-90s, and now she can't do the store anymore. The poor woman would like to take a little time off. Thank you very much. Is that okay? Because I'm 94, and I'm on my feet all day. Problem was, nobody wanted to buy the store. Nobody came forward to buy the store. Still couldn't run it anymore, so she had to close the store. And just like South Ackworth, they had to deal with the little town of Shrewsbury, Vermont, population 847 people. They now had no community gathering place, right? And they too tried to interest a buyer. They too couldn't find someone who wanted to buy the store. So Marjorie Pierce thought a friend of hers might be able to help. He also happens to be one of my favorite New Englanders of all time, Paul Brune. Paul is someone I know all of you, because you like history, would love. Paul Brune is the founder, he's a visionary, and the executive director of the Preservation Trust of Vermont. And what they started to do in Vermont, today they do all over America. And what they do, it sounds so simple, but nobody was preaching this gospel in the 1960s, 70s, and that is, they help cities and towns invest in their history. They help cities and towns preserve their historic spaces. Why? Not out of an overdeveloped sense of nostalgia or sentimentality. They actually do it out of a very developed sense of economics. Because what they have found is, and by historic properties I'm talking about, it could be an historic Main Street, right? Could be an old movie theater, could be a diner, could be a library. Perfect example is, and I know we all know these places, an old mill complex, right? Where they may want to tear it down. I can think of so many mill towns all around New England. I've talked to people there today who've either developed them or towns who have worked to save them, because all through the 60s and 70s, You know, if you were in New Bedford or North Adams or Woonsocket or where have you, these places were nothing but magnets for crime and drugs. But those buildings were not meant to be torn down. And frequently it cost a lot more money to tear them down than it would have been to try to develop them. So they languished. But Paul Broom preaches the gospel, save them. Preserve them, because most developers want to see the bones of what they're imagining. They don't want to look and have to imagine if they're looking at thin air. Same with the house. That's not what Marjorie Pierce wanted to talk about. She called up Paul Broom. She said, Paul, I need to talk to you. So Paul, being the kind of guy he is, he jumped in his beat-up Prius, and he drove down from Burlington, and he got to Shrewsbury, and she said, Paul, I need to reopen the Stoa. He said, Marjorie, how are you going to do that, dear? She said, I'm not going to do it, you are. He said, I don't understand. I'm going to give you the Stoa, ninny. And I'm going to give you $10,000, which is pretty much all the money I have, but I don't expect to need it too much. Moa. So Paul had to explain to Marjorie that the Preservation Trust doesn't own property. Not a single property. It's not what they do. He had to tell it. Marjorie, dear, he said, you know, we help cities and towns invest in their own properties. We don't own properties, not a single property outright. We help cities and towns write grants. We help cities and towns raise money. We help cities and towns get federal funding, state funding, develop loans. But we don't own property. And she said, piffle. Well, according to Paul, this went back and forth for about 35 minutes. But about 35 minutes later, Paul was back in his beat-up Prius, making his way back up to Burlington. And you may not be surprised to find out the Preservation Trust owned his first piece of property. As Paul puts it, you try saying no to Marjorie Pierce when she's in a fettle. So Paul came back down to Shrewsbury about a week and a half later, and he said to the local historical society, he said, look, it's true that I hold the deed to the store, but I'm not going to really own the store. They said, who is? He said, you are. They said, well, who's going to run the store? He said, you are. And they were aghast. Now they were trying to explain to Paul. They were like, Paul. Whoa. They were like, we're farmers. We're craftspeople. We're artisans. This guy makes cheese. And an incredible blue cheese, too. But we're not business people. And he said, relax. We've done this before. He said, it's going to be fun. It's going to be like going back to school. We're going to do lots of field trips. You're going to have some homework. And they did. They learned how to order product. They learned how to do inventory. They learned how to run a store. They completely renovated a 200-year-old general store. And I think they did a pretty fine job, right? Now, I don't mean to suggest this went off without a hitch, okay? Because just before they reopened in 2009, they went back before the town and they asked for more money. You know what that's like. I know you do here. I keep up. You know, this is a town of under 900 people that had already raised $75,000 for the store. And suddenly they went back before the town. They said, well, we need a little more money. What do you need? Well, safely about $1,200. And we really think we should have an emergency generator. Because our feeling is if we're going to be a genuine community gathering place through thick and thin into the future, we want the town to have confidence that no matter what, you know, the worst that a Vermont winter could throw at us will be open. This will be a place that will be a shelter, will be a refuge, will be open. And there was still a lot of complaining. You know how it is in a small town. You know, Marjorie Pierce never needed an emergency generator. But they got it. They got it. And they reopened in 2009, and all was good, and the pump was working again, and they had daily specials at the little deli now that was inside the store, brand new, and all was good. And the little beating heart of Shrewsbury, Vermont was beating once again. Irony of ironies again, it turned out not to be the worst of a Vermont winter that they had to contend with, but believe it or not, the worst of a Vermont August. Because, as you may recall, in August 2011, Hurricane Irene barreled up the East Coast. It was downgraded to a tropical storm by the time it reached New England. But you know, it doesn't matter whether you're packing the 75-mile-an-hour winds of an official hurricane or the 66-mile-an-hour winds of a tropical storm. You're still going to sweep away 200-year-old covered bridges like so much driftwood. And Irene did. The first day Irene hit the Green Mountains, it's still the worst natural disaster in the state's history. The first day it hit, the power went out virtually all over the entire state. The lights went out all over Vermont, including little Shrewsbury, Vermont, except one little spot. Because in Shrewsbury, Vermont, who says historical societies aren't heroes? Right? Because that historical society trooped over through the howling rain and the flying debris, and they fired up that emergency generator, and the lights came on. And to hear my friend Sally Deinzer, who runs the historical society, the chairman of today, she said, you know, I looked out that plate glass window when the lights came on about 4:30 of Irene's first day, and she said it looked like something out of Night of the Living Dead. She said, I could see shadowy figures coming up the hill, and they were seeking out the light. And they got there to Pierce's, and the lights were on, and the coffee was hot, and the Wi-Fi was working, and they were able to call relatives and tell them everything was okay. And you may also not be surprised to find out nobody's ever bellyached about the emergency generator ever again. So now we're up to the mid-2000s, okay, in our story. And now, the national economy has improved. So now, when general stores go up for sale, and they still do, to the tune of $20, $25 a year in New England, but now, because the economy was better, it was now possible for certain individuals sometimes to save the general store. I have several in the chapter I call Honey, I Bought the Store, but I'm just going to limit myself to my favorite one, because this is also not only a great Honey, I Bought the Store, it also is all about, I think, the single most unlikely New England General Store owner in the world. And that would be Steve Carell. How many of you know Steve Carell owns a general store? Yeah, okay. Yeah, a little just to the south of here in Marshville. So Steve Carell grew up in Acton, Massachusetts, right? And when I interviewed Steve on the phone, now that I've talked to him on the phone, I call him Steve. When I talked to Steve on the phone, I asked him, I said, where does your interest in little New England general stores come from, Mr. Hollywood Big Shot? And he said when he was growing up in Acton, there was, unfortunately, a long gone, wonderful old general store. And he said he was enthralled by it, right? And he said he used to ride his bike there, and he said it was the first place that he was allowed to go all by himself on his own little bike, right? Probably one of those little Stingray jobs, right? With the banana seat, right? With his own allowance money jiggling around in the saddlebag and buy candy at the local store. How many of you, maybe to a store in Winthrop, which I don't often, I'm not able to say, how many of you had that experience where a local store here was the first place you were allowed to go by yourself and get something at the local store? Me too. Anybody remember Braff's in the Highlands on Crest Ave? First place I was allowed to go on my little Stingray. First, same thing for Steve, and same thing for Steve's wife Nancy, who grew up on the South Shore. She grew up in Cohasset. Same thing. She told me on hot summer nights, she and her big sister Tish used to go next door to Marshfield, the Marshfield Hills General Store, to get ice cream and candy. So about 15 years ago, over Christmas time, Nancy's big sister Tish went out to Hollywood to visit her little sister and her famous brother-in-law. And while she was there, she told Nancy that the Marshfield Hills General Store is up for sale. And Nancy said, what do you think's going to buy it? And Tish said, I don't know if anybody's going to buy it. And she took out a ratty copy of the Globe she had with her on the plane, and she showed her this story, and it was all about a local developer who was proposing to turn the store into condos. And at that point, Steve Carell said he overheard this, went into the kitchen. Long story short again, when Tish came back east, she had with her a check to purchase the Marshfield Hills General Store. And it really is an authentic, I hadn't even shown Nancy yet. There she is. You very rarely, I think this is maybe the first time in history that a general store owner appeared on the red carpet in Hollywood in a tuxedo with his lovely wife. I'm going to wager a bet. That's the first time in history, in recorded history. All right? So it is an authentic general store. It really is. It still is. It's slightly different today. It's unlike many of the others in the book. Doesn't matter. It's preserved. It's still a general store. It still has a working post office attached to it. It's not the case for most general stores today. On the third floor during the Civil War, they stitched Union Army uniforms And I think the Corrals did a great job of maintaining the historical integrity of the store, right? Right? And Steve Corral did make his sister-in-law Tish general manager. She runs it today. You know, if you drop in there, you can say hi, tell her that you know about her name because you heard this story. And the Corrals own a house today in Cohasset. They're out here for about 5 weeks every summer, and no summer is now complete at the Marshfield Hills General Store without a confirmed sighting of the owner dropping by his store to say hi. So now we have been talking all about saving the general store. But you know, we're up to a point where this is the point in the mid-2000s where the losses of general stores begins to stabilize. And I thought, you know, as putting this talk together, it's also important, I think, to pay some homage, if you'll permit the fancy French word, to some stores that have never needed saving. Some general stores that are so interwoven, right, into the fabric of their community that it is impossible for these communities to imagine that their store wouldn't be there. I call them tried and true. I'll just share one with you. In the Green Mountains of New Hampshire, the Warren General Store, been there for over 200 years. There it is in the early 1940s, but then been there for over 200 years. And it really is, like, in some ways, the quintessential New England General Store. It is the kind of place that you probably find yourself dropping in once or twice, 3 times a week, whether you need something or not. It's just, you know, you just go in. You just go in because you want to say hi, you want to catch up, or you want to talk to Jack Garvin, my friend who owns it. The last time I was at the Warren store, it's easy for you to remember because of what was happening nationally at that time. Because the last time I was in the store, I was just giving this talk the other night, and so it's this week. So 3 years ago, this week, was the last time I was at the Warren store. And I remember because it was, whether you care to remember or not, it was a presidential election year. And it was primary season. And I dropped in to say hi to Jack. And I said, Jack, what's new? And he said, what's new, what's new? Oh, he said, this is new. He said, we're having a contest right now to name the wood stove. I said, really? But in Jack's defense, okay? A, the wood stove at the Warren store is bigger than any wood stove you've ever seen. It's enormous. It's sort of the physically defining characteristic of the store when you walk in. And also, in mud season this time of year in Vermont, it gets kind of slow. So I'm not surprised they were having a little fun with it. So I said, well, do you have any good candidates for a new name? And he said, how funny you should use that word. So it turns out that just 1 week before I'd been in the store, another longtime friend of the store, and a rather famous Vermonter in his own right, had dropped in, which surprised me because I thought he was kind of busy at that point to be back in Vermont at all. But maybe he was doing laundry in Burlington. But he dropped in, Jack told him about it, and obviously quicker on his feet than I am. He said, I have a suggestion. And they liked it, and he won. Bernie Sanders won the stove making contest at the Warren store. How about that, right? And you know, I've always wondered, you know, just about 4 months later, Bernie Sanders did not win in his quest to win the Democratic presidential nomination. And I've always wondered if in that moment of defeat, he thought to himself and he took some small solace in the fact that, unlike Hillary, he won the stove making contest at the Warren store. That's not nothing. That's not nothing. Now, my other sort of companion with Tried and True is a chapter that I call One of a Kind, because these are stores that are kind of like the combo platter of general stores, right? They're like they have a little bit of everything, right? They are tried and true. They have never been up for sale. I don't think these stores will ever be up for sale. They are one of a kind because each of them has something that is so singular, so unique that, well, they needed their own chapter. As long as we're in Vermont, we'll stay there for a minute. Dan & Witt's, one of my very favorites. Dan & Witt's is up in the Upper Valley area of New Hampshire and Vermont, right? So you're going up, say, you know, Route 89, tending northwest, right? And you reach exit 18, Hanover, New Hampshire, right? Dartmouth. And then you keep going, you go right across the Connecticut River, and you'd be in Vermont. and you would be on Main Street, as a matter of fact, if you exited there, and you would see Dan and Witt's. Now, Dan and Witt were not the original owners. Dan and Witt were high school buddies who worked at the store in the 1930s. By the 1950s, they owned the store. They did very well. They were kind of like marketing pioneers for their time, you know, and they did very well. They were so confident, they put that sign in the window. Still there? Right, you've probably seen variations of that. I always say the difference in Dan and Witt's is it might actually be true. It might actually be true. So they did really well, and they wanted to expand, right? What business that does well doesn't want to expand? If it can, you want to double your volume? Sure, why not? Problem was, they were very limited in terms of how they could expand physically. They couldn't expand on this side because of the Norwich Inn. They couldn't expand on this side because of a park. So the only way they could expand was actually directly behind the building where there was almost 3/4 of an acre of a vacant lot, which is a lot of room if you're a little general store, which is what makes Dan and Witt's one of a kind, because it represents a really bizarre grafting job, okay? So when you walk in, this is what you see from the door at Dan and Witt's. So it has that really kind of classic, traditional, slightly claustrophobic, cozy, cluttered, right? And in fact, the distance from the front door to where that guy and his son are standing is probably, it's not even as far between these two walls. Maybe from where I'm standing to the wall right there. So it's very small, right? But if you go to the left here, from where this guy and his son are standing, if that cabinet refrigerator was there, you'd see the butcher counter. And next to the butcher counter, there's a doorway. There's no sign. There's no door, as I recall. But if you go through that door, you're in a very different place. You're in the back, okay? And the back actually has more of a big box store feel to it than a little general store. It's just a maze of kind of alleyways and aisles going every which way. They claim there's some order to it, but don't believe it. Don't believe it. They just put stuff wherever they put it, and it stays there. They have no order. And you could get lost back there, and I'm big enough to admit I did. So the first time I was back in the back was a late winter day, and Dan Frazier, the original Dan's grandson, was showing me around. He said, we're short-handed, I got to run out front, you're welcome to look around. I did. After about 5-10 minutes, I was ready to walk back out. Couldn't find my way out. Which is more embarrassing than panic-inducing, right? So what am I going to do, call him out at the front? Hi, Dan. So I finally got my way out, right? And I said, Dan, I just got lost in the back. And he said, oh, please, it happens all the time. I said, really? I'm not the only moron? He said, no, it happens all the time. So it turns out, at Dan and Witt's, they have allowed for this by creating what I can only describe as the ski patrol for business. If any of you ski or have skied, you may know that when the ski lifts close to the public at the end of the day, right? So generally between 3:30 and 4:30, depending on the light and the time of year, when they close to the public, then the ski patrol goes up, and they go down every single trail and slope to flush them out. God forbid somebody's hurt and left behind after dark, right? 9 o'clock closing every night at Dan and Witt's. They send someone out to flush out the back. It's a nice public service. So I said to Dan, yeah, but you don't find people out there at 9 o'clock, right? He said, oh yeah. Oh yeah. I said, really? Who do you find back there? He said, I would say on average, once or twice a week, we'll go out there and find some like 10-year-old kid wandering around. I said, really? I said, that's not good, Dan. He said, you know what's really not good? And this is just between you and me. He said, half the time we know for a fact their parents left like an hour ago. Their Ski Patrol 2.0 needs a little bit of tweaking, I think. But my other favorite one of a kind is in Windsor, Maine, where Harlan Hussey, looks like Hussey, German immigrant, pronounced it Hussey, also, just like Dan and Witt, did very well all through the 1920s, 30s, 40s. Also wanted to expand his little one-story, little kind of garage-like general store. Also was very limited in terms of how he could expand. Couldn't expand on either side. Couldn't expand in back because it's wetlands. So his only option for expansion was up and down, So he did. In 1957, he opened the new 3-story commercial colossus that is Huzzies in Windsor, Maine. So it has a huge ground floor level, it has a huge below ground level, it has a huge second floor level. Now you might imagine, in terms of what makes this place so unique, that's one thing, but that's not what makes it one of a kind. You might imagine that if you were going to run into a place this size, and you were after something small, right? Say a pair of bootlaces, right? Or a lamp wick, or what have you. You might need a little bit of guidance, you know, to like, I don't want to rummage through 3 floors to find a pair of, you know, bootlaces. So they do. They have a sign, a huge guidepost when you walk in. If you start reading the guidepost from the bottom up, you will see what makes Huzzies so unique. So you walk in. So far, yeah, everything looks kosher, right? Wood stoves, home garden, plumbing, electrical paint, hardware, camping gear, fishing, hunting supplies, guns, bridal gowns, clothes. Whoa, what?
Wow.
Which one of these does not belong? Right. Huzzies in Windsor, Maine is, as far as our research has shown, the only general store on the face of the earth where you can buy the combination of guns, gowns, and beer. Can't do that anywhere else. Or basically, another way of looking at it is, you're one-stop shopping for a shotgun wedding. Right? I'm only half kidding. I'm only half kidding. Because that's exactly what Harlan Huzzy's granddaughter Kristen had some fun with on her wedding day. There's the lovely bride with her bridal bouquet, a 6-pack of Narragansett, and the groom is holding a brand new 12-gauge. As we finish, because I assume, like me, most of you would like to go home and spend the night in your own bed at some point. So, as we finish, this is the, well, let me put it this way. This was not part of my book talk when I started giving my book talk about a year and a half ago. But it became part of my book talk because I realized it's my favorite general store. And I love diners and general stores, that's true. What I really love are meeting underdogs. People that have overcome sometimes literally crippling challenges, sometimes emotional. People who have found a way to overcome a staggering challenge and continue and live a life of purpose and meaning and dignity. I love underdogs that are towns. Harbor towns, you know, fishing towns that have had to reinvent themselves, mill towns, long after the prosperity has left. You can't just close down the town. You got to find a way to go on, right? This store is the ultimate underdog of general stores. There is no store in America that has suffered more for its general store than this one. There's been a general store in Putney, Vermont for over 200 years. A.M. Corso, one of only 13 general store owners in all of that time. What does that say? That says that the people who owned the store felt just as attached to the community as the community felt towards the store. Only 13 owners in over 200 years. It's always been a general store. It's always looked very much like that. Right? It's always occupied the exact same spot just above Little Sackett's Brook, right there in the middle of Putney, except when it wasn't there. That sounds like a riddle. Yeah. I wish it were that mysterious, but there was no mystery to the first time it almost wasn't there. It was on a terrible night in May 2008 when a fire broke out. On the second floor, faulty wiring caused the fire to break out about 1 o'clock in the morning. Thank goodness for volunteer fire departments, because you know, with a volunteer force, the fire gets put out only as fast as you can muster the people and the equipment to get there, right? And they got there fast enough. I know it looks bad, but they got there fast enough to save almost 2/3 of the building. That was the good news. The bad news was the owners had no insurance. Not only that, they decided to cut their losses and skip town, leaving the little town of Putney, Vermont, population 967 people, to figure out what were they going to do with their beloved little general store that now has no owner and we have no money. Well, remember our friend Paul Brune? Yeah. They should call it the Brune-mobile, like the Batmobile. Paul went out. Paul came down to Putney this time. And the first thing he said was, when he spoke to Lisa Papazian, again, another wonderful heroic, chairman of her local historical society. And he said, well, the first thing we need to do is make it so that the town owns the store. That's the first thing we're going to do, because in my vast experience, he said, I have found it very difficult for a town to skip town, no matter what happens. He's got a point, right? He's got a point. So he did. He worked with them, the local historical society, representing the town, and they were able to raise money. They were able to get federal funding and state funding and loans, and they were able to take over the store and find someone to run it, and they rebuilt the store, and the gleaming new store opened, and all was good once again in Putney, Vermont. The little beating heart of Putney was beating once again. Oh, was it short-lived? This is less than 2 years later. 1 year and a half. 1 year and 6 months later, fire broke out again. I'm going to tell you, fire broke out again in the Putney store. It went to 18 alarms. It drew apparatus from as far away as Worcester. Wow. It could have gone to 118 alarms. They wouldn't have put out this fire. Burned down to the foundation stones in less than an hour. This time there was no faulty wiring in the attic, but investigators did find traces of massive accelerant throughout the building. Arson. So this time, the little town of Putney, Vermont had to deal with the double gut punch that not only had they just lost their beloved little general store for the second time in less than 2 years, but the person who did this horrible thing might be a neighbor. Who knows? That's the terror of arson. So the call went out to Paul Bloom once again. And Paul came down, and this time he was much more stark and sober. He said, you know, I will help you as much as I can, but I have to tell you, I've been on the phone this morning with Bernie Sanders, and he said that I have to tell you that the store was the collateral for the federal funding, which was the biggest piece of the economic pie, and with the store gone, the federal funding is gone. I'm not sure what to tell you. They met at the little local stone church that stands right across the street from where the store had stood. There was a lot of anguish. There was a lot of tears. After about an hour, small town, right? Word got out. They were meeting about the store. And after about an hour, there were over 100 people that were trying to crowd into the church. They had to move the meeting out into the open air. After a little bit, an older gentleman whose family goes back 5 generations in Putney stood up on that little low stone wall and he said, I just have one thing to say to you. He said, I don't know about the rest of you, but I will be goddamn if I'm going to let an arsonist define my dear town. And he sat down, and Paul Bloom kind of let his words hang in the chill air. And Paul stood up and he said, if I understand my friend here correctly, I think we need to rebuild. And they did. And the one single silver lining in this terrible tragedy is that it was such a tragedy, it made front page news all over the world. Literally. There were evening television broadcasts, news broadcasts, that led with the Putney fire. There were foreign newspapers that had a picture of the Putney fire on their front page. And money poured into Putney. They had more money than they knew what to do with. They were able to form an endowment for the store. And they were able to rebuild the store better. They got donated labor from everybody from carpenters, contractors, sawyers, to cut the timber. They were able to build the store bigger, twice as big, twice as secure. Now, they still needed somebody to run the store. So they found a wonderful person to run the store. He was just had retired, but said he wanted to go back to work. He was a pharmacist. His family had been immigrants, and they had immigrated and settled in Putney, Vermont about 20 years before. And he said that, you know, when we moved here and didn't know anybody and didn't even speak English, he said we felt like the store was family. We felt accepted. And he said, I want to give something back. If I can run my pharmacy out of the storage area on the second floor, I don't want to take a dime from the store. And they said, oh, that sounds good. So he went to work in the store, and you'll note the pharmacy sign now that was added for the first time in 200 years, and all was good once again in Putney. Until New Year's Day 2017. Whoa! I said it was an underdog story, right? Rocky doesn't bounce up off the mat the first time and knock out Apollo Creed, right? Just the same with Putney. This store just kept getting knocked down. On New Year's Day 2017, this lovely gentleman died. And neither of his adult children wanted to come back to Putney, Vermont and run a store. And the store closed again. But this time Paul Broom got the jump on Putney. He called up Lisa Papazian, the Historical Society. He said, Lisa, you got to reopen that store. She said, Paul, we don't have enough people. He said, Lisa, trust me. He said, the longer you stay closed, the longer it will be before you ever reopen. That's how it works. People will begin to develop alternate plans when they go into town. And it will take forever for you to reopen. How many people are in the Historical Society now? He said. She said, 41, 42? He said, good. Put everybody to work 1 hour a week and reopen the store. And they did. And they reopened last May. They are running again. It is truly about perseverance in Putney. And as I finish, I do want to point out two things. One, just a little note of reality. So, we've been talking about saving all these wonderful general stores. Well, if you want to support a general store, you should, because they still close all the time. I said 20 to 25 a year in New England. That may include a favorite of yours. You know, probably the most notable closure was 7 years ago in Adamsville, Rhode Island, little village of Little Compton, right? When Gray's closed. At that time, Gray's was the longest continuously operating general store in America. 224 years. That's only 20 years less than the country had been in business, right? More poignantly, perhaps, the Monterey General Store in the Berkshire. This is actually a page directly from my book. That's one of the pictures in my book. When the book went to the publisher, just under 2 years ago, the Monterey General Store was alive and well. Today, it's dead. So they still close, and more will continue to close, were it not for, lastly, a new breed of general store owners. God bless them. God love them. What I love about the new breed of general store owners, again, another irony, is their relative youth. You would be surprised how many new general store owners all around New England today are millennials, in and around 30 years old. And no knock on millennials, not at all. But I would have just thought that perhaps the generation that first came of age with the internet and cell phones would not be people who would, like perhaps their parents or grandparents, have the same feeling about a brick and mortar experience. But they do. Not all, but many, many. I like to call my poster children of the new breed of general store owners, Ben and Taryn Marcus in Whitefield, Maine. You know, you're looking at two people who not only never wanted to run a general store, they're farmers. They're farmers. The last thing they ever thought they'd be doing, they met at agriculture school in Washington State. Ben's family was from Whitefield. When they graduated, they moved back. They were hoping to afford a few acres of land to farm. Land in central Maine is very expensive. Very expensive. They couldn't afford anything. And finally, one guy came up to him one day. He said, look, I know you guys have been walking around town for the better part of the last year trying to find some farmland. He said, I'm going to make you a crazy offer. You're going to look for the guys on the white coats behind me, but here goes. He said, I will give you 5 acres of prime farmland. We'll produce organic produce like gangbusters. And they said, what's the catch? And he said, the catch. Yes, the catch. There is a catch. He said, the catch is, there is a long closed general store on the property, Sheepscot General. He said, I've always thought maybe I would reopen it, but I don't think that's going to happen. But he said, if you guys will reopen the store, keep it open for just 2 years, the land is yours in perpetuity. And they still deliberated. That's how much they did not want to run a store. So they decided they'd cut their losses, right, hedge their bets, and they decided they'll only get stuff for the store that they like, especially food. They said, let's just buy stuff that we like to eat. No, because the thinking was, this thing's going to go south, you know, in less than a year, and we can personally liquidate the inventory. We won't have to go food shopping for a year and a half, right? But that didn't happen. It didn't happen. Oh, the land produced all right. Organic carrots the size of your forearm. People started lining up at 6 o'clock on Friday morning to buy their produce. And then after about 6 or 8 months, Ben and Taryn looked at each other and they said, you know what? Wouldn't it be great if instead of one of us driving hundreds of miles every week to hit every single farmer's market in southern New England, which is what you have to do today, what if we could find somebody and like run a little kitchen in the store, use our produce, and they did. They found a wonderful person to open up a little cafe. Now people were lining up every morning at 6 o'clock to have breakfast, to have lunch. Then they went crazy. Then they started doing things in a general store that had never been done in any general store. Let me tell you something. The last anvil that was purchased in a New England general store was in 1930. People are not buying hardware in general stores anymore, and you will rarely find hardware in general stores. They've swapped hardware for food.